Take Back Your Health Now, Episode 17. You're listening to the Take Back Your Health Now podcast, the show that interviews the top doctors, athletes, trainers, and entrepreneurs to help you find the holy grail of health. Now here's your host, Dr. Dan Margolin.
This is Dr. Dan Margolin with another segment of Take Back Your Health Now. We're excited to have Dr. Stephen Gundry as our guest. Dr. Gundry is the director of the International Heart and Lung Institute in Palm Springs, California, and the founder director of the Center for Restorative Medicine in Palm Springs and Santa Barbara. But he is destined to be known by everyday people outside his field as the author of the life-changing book, Dr. Gundry's Diet Evolution. Turn off the genes that are killing you and your waistline and drop the weight for good. Quite a mouthful. It is fast becoming the new Bible for smart eating, and its secrets extend far beyond what people believe is the obvious. Dr. Gundry, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Dr. Gundry, how did you get started? I know in your field, what got you so much to focus on nutrition?
Back in the dark ages, I had a special major at Yale University where I had to defend a thesis that you could change the food supply and environment of a great ape and turn it into a human. And I luckily got honors for my thesis. But then I went to medical school and I became a very famous heart surgeon, professor, and chairman at Loma Linda University. And kind of forgot all that. And then about 17 years ago, I was referred a patient from Miami, Florida, who had inoperable coronary artery disease. So all his blood vessels were clogged up. You couldn't put stents in it. You couldn't do bypasses.
Right.
And this guy had been going around the country visiting surgeons and cardiologists like myself to see if anything could be done, and everybody turned him down. And I call him Big Ed in my book. And so Big Ed, I looked at his angiogram, the movie of his heart, and I agreed with everybody else that we weren't going to be able to help him. And he said, well, not so fast. That angiogram was done 6 months ago. I've gone on a diet. I've lost 45 pounds. And I went to a health food store, and I'm taking all these supplements, in a huge shopping bag of supplements. He said, maybe I did something to my heart. And I said, well, good for you for losing weight, but that's really not going to do anything for this. And I know what you did with all your supplements. You've made expensive urine, which I really believed back then.
Now, Dr. Gundry, this was basically a death sentence to him, right? I mean, he was.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
He was 48 years old, and basically nothing could be done for him. Wow. So anyhow, he talked me into getting a new angiogram, a new movie, and in 6 months' time, this guy had cleaned out 50% of the blockages in his heart.
Wow.
Yeah. Now there were still plenty of blockages, but now there were places to do bypasses. So the next day I actually did a 5-vessel bypass on him and did well. But I'm a researcher. And so I said, after we were done, I said, tell me about this diet you've been on. And let me look at those supplements. Well, the diet he was on was exactly like the thesis that I had done at Yale years ago.
No way.
Yeah, and my parents still had my thesis, all 175 pages of it. And I said, send that to me, because I was a big fat guy. And the supplements he was taking, I was actually using in the laboratory to keep hearts alive for 48 hours in a bucket of ice water. And I was putting them through the veins and arteries of the hearts, and it never occurred to me to swallow them. Now, I was obese, I was pre-diabetic, I had hypertension, I had migraines, I had arthritis, I was running 30 miles a week and going to the gym 1 hour a day, and I was eating a healthy low-fat diet, and I said, son of a gun. So I put myself on the program I described years earlier. And the first year I lost 50 pounds, and subsequently I've lost another 20. And I started taking a lot of supplements. And I started sending my blood work up to the University of California, Berkeley, at the Berkeley Heart Lab. And lo and behold, all of my blood work really almost instantaneously started changing. I was no longer pre-diabetic. I no longer was hypertensive. I used to have very high cholesterols. My cholesterols were absolutely normal. My arthritis went away. And
Wow.
people on my staff at Loma Linda noticed, and they started going on this program. And the same things happened to them. And
Huh.
then finally, I started putting my patients on the program, and the same things happened. So after about a year of this at Loma Linda, I finally decided that I shouldn't really operate on people very much, and that most of people's problems I could get rid of with food and a few simple supplements.
I mean,
So
this is a revolutionary kind of concept, especially coming from your background. I mean,
yeah, exactly. I mean,
yeah.
you talk about changing the arc of my life. Big Ed changed the arc of my life.
Wow, wow. Dr. Gundry, let me ask you. So, in the initial thing that you wrote up about switching gorillas, how did you come up with that? Like, what led you to come up with the correct nutritional supplements at that time?
Well, it's interesting. We share really 98 to 99% of our genes with chimps and gorillas. And so we're uh, almost genetically identical. But
Hmm.
what we didn't know until recently is it's really not so much the genes that you have, but it's actually the information that you send genes to turn them off and on. And
Okay.
it's now called epigenomics. And we know that really genes per se aren't the problem, it's the messages that you send genes.
Hmm.
And it's the messages you send in terms of the time of year, in terms of the food availability, in terms of the chemicals that are in plants, and even the length of daylight that changes things. And
Hmm.
what's really exciting in the last 5 years, we've come to realize that human genes get these messages, but more importantly, if we did genetic counts of humans, 99% of all the genes that are present in a human are actually non human genes. They're genes in our bacteria and the viruses that live in us. So
Wow.
we're
Wow.
now beginning to discover that it's actually our microbiome genes, or the bugs that live in us and on us, that are actually interpreting the signals from plant compounds or times of day, and then communicating that information to our human genes. Now, a lot of people get very squeamish about that little one-celled organisms could have such a profound effect on us. We think we're rather important,
Right.
but
Right.
in fact, we're basically a condominium for bacteria and viruses. And one of the things we're discovering is that they have a vested interest in their home. And the more we actually keep bacteria in us and on us happy by giving them the things they like to eat, then the more they keep their home spruced up.
Wow.
And I get to play with people all day, every day, and just teach them the basic rules that our microbiome follows and their genes follow, and in turn, what will happen to our genes.
That is fascinating. What was the diet that you switched to? Like, what was the diet that would affect these genes to such a degree that they would keep their condominium spruced up?
Yeah, so one of the things that is fascinating that's now been confirmed, not only in animals but in human research, is there's essentially two types of bacteria in our gut that are constantly fighting for space and for power. And I call the good guys gut buddies and the
Mhm.
bad guys gang members. And the gut buddies, they actually communicate to our immune system that, hey, everything's great down here. We're sitting on the beach by a campfire singing Kumbaya.
Mm-hmm.
And we can all kind of relax. Now, gang members, if gang members, move into the neighborhood, now all of a sudden people are putting up bars on their windows, and there's neighborhood watch patrols shooting guys with hoodies. And so our entire immune system becomes activated to look out for intruders.
Right.
Now, the good guys, believe it or not, they have fairly interesting wants, and they like primarily what are called resistant starches. These are sugars that we don't digest very well, but the bugs are profoundly equipped to, in fact, digest these materials and then actually give us, if you will, their leftovers, which is actually what we need. Now, the problem with the gang members is they actually don't like those things. Instead, they love simple sugars and saturated fats. And what they do is they love it so much that they crowd out the good guys because they can use these things and the good guys can't. And so the good guys are kind of marginalized, kind of shaking over in the corner.
Right.
Now, the amazing thing that we now know is that these gang members can actually control our appetites and our choices in food. So, for instance, we can take bowel movements from obese people and feed them to skinny rats, and the rats will become obese simply by changing the bacteria in their gut. Now, the same thing happens if we take bowel movements from skinny people and feed them to fat rats. The fat rats will become skinny because the bacteria have changed.
So there's actually a war going on for the bacteria.
There's an absolute war going on between these two sets of bacteria. And believe it or not, there's over 10,000 different species, but we know that they essentially cluster into two groups. And the more we let the good guys get the upper hand, it basically drives the bad guys out. But the bad guys don't go without a fight. There's a very famous Broadway show, musical, and movie called Little Shop of Horrors.
Sure.
And most people have heard of it. It's about a blood-sucking plant that gets hungrier and hungrier and bigger, and the poor dweeb has to keep giving him his own blood and then bring victims. But the plant's name is Audrey, and Audrey keeps saying, "Feed me, Seymour, feed me."
Right.
Well, these sorts of messages actually are communicated to our brain by the bugs that live in our gut. And the more of these guys that take over, the more you actually are instructed, "Feed me, Seymour, feed me." And in fact, recently they've taken poops from obese individuals and fed it to skinny rats, and then give the skinny rats a choice between, quote, healthy rat chow and the standard American diet of French fries and a Coke and a burger. And the rats, even though they were skinny, with their new bugs, actually go for the standard American diet and ignore the rat chow.
Now, Doctor, are you saying before they were given that, they would have chosen the healthier diet?
Correct. They go for the rat chow. Yep.
I mean, that's definitive proof right there. I mean, there's really, that's it right there.
And this is one of the things I try to communicate to people in the next book, The Plant Paradox, that, believe it or not, it's not our fault, most of the things that are happening to us. And we can talk about that if you want to as we go along.
Sure. I definitely want to ask you a question like, what is the plant paradox? But yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so what happens is we've really changed the microbiome within us over the last 40 years. And there's a number of factors which I call the 7 deadly disruptors, and we won't go through them all today. But one of the things that's dramatically changed in us is broad spectrum antibiotics have become ubiquitous in our lives.
Sure.
We not only take them for any illness, in other words, if we have a sore throat or a cough, a well-meaning doctor will say, "Oh, here, take a Z-Pack or take some Cipro or take some Levaquin, and you'll be fine." Well, we didn't know that antibiotics, biome means living thing, and so antibiotics basically, it's like putting napalm on a wonderful tropical rainforest, and we view this community of bugs as a mature tropical rainforest, and then we drop napalm on this rainforest, and it burns to the ground. We naively think, well, we can take some probiotics, some good bugs, and swallow them, and everything will be fine. Well, the last time anyone's looked at a forest fire and then watched what happens, we could plant brand new seeds or little trees, but it would take 20, 30 years for that mature forest to regrow.
Wow.
And there's now really good information in humans that a single dose of antibiotics may deplete your rainforest for over 2 years.
That is crazy. Wow. I mean, we're not taught this in medical school at all.
No. None of this was taught to us. The other thing that most people know, have heard about, is the antibiotics that are fed to beef and pork and even chickens. Now, most people assume that chickens are no longer fed antibiotics, but there are antibiotic-like substances like arsenic, which is actually given to chickens to make their meat look more red. Now, the FDA has finally, as you may know, banned antibiotics in chickens with an important exception. If the veterinarian at the chicken farm believes there is a threatening infection, he can go ahead and give everybody antibiotics because you wouldn't single out one bird. And guess what? There's always some infection in these crowded conditions. So there's an amazing loophole that people don't know about. So the point of all this is there are antibiotics in all of our commercially raised beef and pork and chickens. And those minute amounts of antibiotics that we're eating every day do the exact same thing. They decimate the rainforest within us.
My God. I saw a study that showed even in the water that we drink in New York City, the amount of drugs that were in just the normal drinking water. So I can't imagine how many different antibiotics would be in there as well.
Yep, plenty of them, because people actually throw them down their drains.
Right. I mean, let me ask you a question then. That brings to mind the concept of a pregnant woman taking an antibiotic or just eating chicken that had antibiotics. How does that affect the fetus, and how has that changed over the last 40 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's been some beautiful research that's come out of Harvard and also New York City that shows that a single round of antibiotics in a pregnant woman will predispose her baby to become obese because it changed the microbiome. And we now know that there's actually bugs in the placenta and actually in the baby before the baby is born. The other thing that's striking is that the baby gets one or more rounds of antibiotics early in life for an ear infection, which is incredibly commonly treated with antibiotics. It predisposes the baby to obesity because it changes the gut bacteria. And so even the mother taking antibiotics changes her baby.
Dr. Gundry, you're actually blowing me away, because this is something I have never heard. I've never, at least I've never heard it with any kind of emphasis as to the long-term effects. And I know as a doctor, we give antibiotics pretty freely because you want to protect the patient, but you don't realize, nobody's ever really points it out to you, that you could be creating more harm. And the concept of medicine is really first do no harm.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, these are, they were unintended consequences. The problem is, with our current state of knowledge, what I fear is that these are intended consequences, because quite frankly, the sicker we become, the better it is for certain parts of our society in terms of pharmaceutical companies,
Sure.
big agriculture, and quite frankly, big medicine.
Well, let me ask you, that brings up the next question. What kind of a kickback are you getting from this? I mean, are your colleagues, are they, initially it sounded like they were quite open. When you really take it to this level where you're really looking at it and it could affect the bottom line, what are you
Well, believe it or not, I have a lot of physicians that actually secretly see me.
Okay.
And I have actually a lot of other cardiologists that will send people to me. I mean, I've published the results of a 12-year study taking people with known coronary artery disease and putting on my dietary program and supplementation and following them for 12 years. And the recurrence rate of coronary artery disease or stroke or death from heart disease at the end of 12 years is only 2%. Just to give you an idea, if you look at a normal person with coronary disease, within 5 years, 50% of them will have a new event, even on statin therapy. So the striking thing is, I was all wrong in what I was taught about the body's ability to what I call heal itself. And you mentioned we're taught to do no harm, and Hippocrates had some amazing insights. Hippocrates actually said that all disease begins in the gut. What he didn't say was all disease ends in the gut, but that's my paraphrase. But Hippocrates had an amazing idea of what a physician was supposed to do. So Hippocrates believed in this ability of any creature to have vibrant health and to actually heal itself. And it was called green life force energy. There's a fancy Greek word for it.
Okay.
But the important thing is that Hippocrates said that everybody can heal themselves as long as the outside forces, the external forces that are keeping the patient from healing himself, are removed. So Hippocrates said that the purpose of a physician is to be a detective and to find the external forces that are keeping the patient from healing himself and then removing the external forces. And once you remove those forces, this green life force energy will take care of everything else. And so for a heart surgeon to tell you that I'm going to, rather than put some new plumbing in you, I'm going to investigate what are these forces that are keeping you from having perfect health. I'm going to tell you what they are, and then I'm going to hopefully have you remove them. And what I've found through the years with sophisticated blood tests that we send all over the country is we can actually measure the effect of removing these forces. And I mean, it's I wake up every day like a kid in a candy store, because I can watch a person with Crohn's heal their Crohn's in 3 months, and a person with MS get out of a wheelchair in 6 months.
Wow.
And a person with left main coronary artery disease who a year later has a negative stress test.
Wow. Dr. Gundry, I've done a lot of interviews. This is like one of the more fascinating interviews I've ever done, because it's shocking, because it's just shocking. I mean, you're a heart surgeon. You're someone that actually has looked at it. It's almost, I got to tell you, like looking at Hippocrates, it's almost like medicine is starting to come full circle back to his original concept, where
I hope so.
Right? I mean, well, you're
Yeah,
certainly advocating that, and then part of my webcast is we're in search of the holy grail of health. I mean, we're really starting to, I think, as physicians, step back and say, hey, let's look at this with a little bit of a different viewpoint because we're not doing that great. I mean, it doesn't seem like
yeah.
with all the medicine, people are getting that much healthier. Am I wrong? I
No,
mean,
no. We're a baby boomer, which I am, is actually sicker at a chronological age that sicker than his parents were. And I mean, in other words, we're on more medications, we've had more procedures, and we think of ourselves as healthier, but in fact, our health span, which is the time that we're actually in good health, is dramatically decreasing.
hmm,
And what's happening is what we call our senescence when we begin to deteriorate, which in old times, even 100 years ago, was a very short period of time. Now we're spending half to a third of our lives in a downhill spiral, in senescence, rather than having a health span. And that's what's got to stop because you and I know, I mean, we will go bankrupt
yeah,
in healthcare.
yeah. I mean, it's really like you're saying, it's quality of life. It's really the
Yeah.
quality of life that we're not necessarily providing for these people. Well, Dr. Gundry, let me ask. So we are in search of the holy grail of health. If I were to narrow it down to that, and I say, what would you consider the holy grail of health? What would that be, sir?
Well, I think Hippocrates was absolutely right. All disease begins and ends in the gut. 90% of the cells that make us human are actually non human cells. 99% of our genes are non human genes. And the more we look within and give the vast population of cells that makes us what they need to flourish, they'll take care of the rest of us. And it's a funny concept, but what goes through your mouth is actually there not to feed you, but it's actually to feed the 90% of you that you don't even think about.
Wow. Wow. And the good guys are looking for they'll sort of clue you into the nutrition, and the bad guys, if they're taking over, they'll do the same thing. So it just
Yeah,
depends.
they'll do the same thing.
Yeah.
They'll say, feed me.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's good.
and I spend a lot of time studying long-lived cultures around the world. Spend a lot of my time, visiting them and seeing what cooks. And the interesting thing, I'll leave you with this parting word from the Plant Paradox, which will be out in April on HarperCollins. If you look at the blue zones, the common factor in the blue zones is they have wildly different diets. They have wildly different fat intakes. But the common factor that unites all of them is they eat very little animal protein. Now, I hate to say that because I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and beef for breakfast, cheese for
Right.
lunch, and so I have a bias against saying this, but I also was professor at Loma Linda for 16 years, which is a vegetarian Adventist institution. And the Loma Linda vegan Adventists have the longest lives of any culture studied anywhere in the world.
What is, that's a good question. How long should we be living?
Oh, I think, in our office we have a humorous saying is 150 is the new 100. There's certainly very good evidence that our lifespan can easily go to 115 years. It's been beaten. The current record holder is 116. It's not unreasonable to think 120, 125 years is perfectly attainable. The lady who starts my first book, whose name in the book is Michelle, her real name is Edith Murray, and I can tell you that because she tells everyone at my speeches.
Sure.
She'll turn 105 in May. And she still walks in to see me in her 2-inch heels. She's dressed in the nines. She has hair, makeup, gorgeous woman, smart.
Wow.
And
Wow.
Edith learned from a nutritionist by the name of Gaylord Hauser. Years ago, when she was 20 years old, Gaylord Hauser told her, go home, throw all white foods out of your pantry, and never eat a white food again. And she took him at his word, and she actually buried 2 husbands, including a physician who told her her way of eating was crazy.
Right.
And I met Edith 16 years ago when she was about 90.
Yeah.
And I thought she was 65. I actually looked at the chart about 3 times.
Wow.
And I said, why are you here? And she said, you talk like the nutritionist who changed my life when I was 20, and I want you to be my doctor. So we've had a great relationship ever since. And I've read all of Gaylord Hauser's work, and it's funny. I could have written his books, or he could have written my books, because the guy was so far ahead of his time. But Edith Murray is thriving at 105, and like I say, she still wears 2-inch heels. Now, I admit she used to wear 3-inch heels, but
right.
2 inches at 105 is pretty darn good.
Damn good. Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Gundry, how would people find out more about you, sir?
So they can go to a couple websites. If they want to sign up for a newsletter that I'm sending out constantly, they can go to gundrymd.com. If they want to find more about my office practice, they can go to drgundry.com, all one word, Dr. Gundry, Gundry. Both ways will get you there.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Dr. Gundry, I want to thank you. This was an amazing podcast. I absolutely appreciate you being on the show, sir.
Hey, no problem. I'm happy to be on. I'm happy to come back.
Thank you. Thank you. We'd definitely love to have you back, sir.
This episode is sponsored by New Jersey Foot and Ankle Center in Oradell, New Jersey. Remember, when you have a foot problem, you've got a foot doctor in the family. Weekend and evening appointments are available. Call us at 201-261-9445. Once again, that's 201-261-9445. Thanks for listening. Check out the show notes over at drdanspeaks.com. If you're loving the show, head over to iTunes and leave us a review, and we'll catch you next time. This episode is brought to you by Slate Media Productions. Provided by, for more information, Randy Ramos Jr. Visit Slate Media to see and hear more of his work, visit randyramosjr.com.